The third word, woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. This word is taken from the Gospel of John. And in a certain sense, just as those two bandits were on either side of the cross, here you have two other individuals standing by the foot of the cross. John and our Blessed Mother Mary. Two great disciples, but coming from two different backgrounds. John was known as the beloved disciple of Jesus. Very unique, because his kind of love for Jesus was not the one that was of the other disciples. Very close and intimate, so that even the other 11 knew that there was an intimate relationship between John and Jesus. He has precise intuitions into Jesus. He is the only one who narrates that at the Last Supper, Jesus washed feet. The others were not able to sense it. So that intimate bond with Jesus made him not to abandon Jesus. All the others did it. He found himself at the foot of the cross. What a great sense of discipleship. Someone who never knew Jesus becomes his disciple, and that too a very intimate disciple. Mary too was a disciple, but her background is different. She was his mother. So her kind of discipleship is very different, obviously. She, in fact, is the one who initiated Jesus into a love for the Father. She followed her son. Probably she was not aware of all that he was teaching. John was totally aware of all that. But as a mother, she followed him. And she was worried about him. And he made him also do the work of the Father like she did in Cana. And there she was told that the hour has not yet come. And now she is at the cross, at the foot of the cross, when the hour is on. A very different dynamic of a discipleship. And yet these two great disciples at the foot of Jesus' cross, in his dying moments, what does Jesus do? He attempts to merge these two discipleships. He asks Mary to behold her son. Obviously, Mary was a disciple because she was mother, she was family. It was a unique form of discipleship. She cared for him, admired him. She knew him as a little boy. She was worried about him, worried of the consequences of what he was doing. All that is great love. But she also loved him as a woman, a mother. Pope Francis is saying very clearly this, and also Emeritus Pope Benedict XVI, that the feminine genius is very different from the male genius. The way you love, therefore, the way women love is different from the way men love. You can see it in our own homes. It has an influence on our children as well. So very often we think, particularly contemporary culture, that Mary just walking along with Jesus, not intervening and stopping him from being agonized, is a kind of a weakness. In today's culture, we do not appreciate such weakness. But it is a different form of love, a passive love. All the more concerned to be there when a person is suffering. This is not weakness. This is the power of passive love that even Jesus is trying to show when he did nothing to prevent himself from being nailed. The power of passive love. The world today wants to debate this. The world understands only revenge. It doesn't understand passive love. But there is a power impassive love which the feminine genius shows so very clearly, particularly Mary. And she is commended by Jesus in his dying moments to direct that love that she has for her son to John, to open up the boundary of that love. Obviously she was in love with Jesus as a son, but he's telling her, open up that boundary. Take John as your son, as your son. And he's doing the same to John when he asks him to behold his mother. John was a disciple not because of a family, but because he was enamored with what Jesus taught, and he wanted to be faithful to what Jesus taught. And what was Jesus teaching? That you love everybody. But that boundary and the kind of love, John is being told now, just as I love my mother, she's your mother as well. So open up the boundaries of your love. Not a kind of objective love that you can have for other people, but like family love. That is what John is being told by Jesus. Make my mother your own. Make my brothers your own. Did Jesus have brothers? Yes. All, including sinners and prostitutes. Make them your brothers and sisters. Make my family your family. And in that, Jesus is trying to merge these two disciples, these two discipleships, making sure that the church that he is going to establish on the cross is going to be this one seamless family of people. And that is why we believe that the church was generated at the foot of the cross. St. John's take on this whole building of the church is that the cross was built there at the foot of the cross. Because Mary and John, right there when Jesus is suffering and experiencing his passion, they begin to understand what kind of a community Jesus wants to build. Not only those community of those disciples who were enamored with what they taught, saw all that he did, and then finally disappeared. No. Like this John who found himself at the foot of the cross. Like Mary also, who comes in from another background, but now bringing together this wide family. And that family is the church. And because they can see that Jesus is telling them this in his last dying moments, they are all the more convinced about what kind of a family Jesus wants to build, what kind of a church Jesus wants to build. Very soon after he dies, obviously, when his side is pierced with the lance, you know that blood and water will flow out. That was the foundation of the church. And therefore, the church is defined by relationships of the family of Jesus. There can be no difference. If you are son, father, mother, daughter, neighbor, you are part of Jesus' family. And this is indeed what the Holy Father wants to proclaim to all of us. That we need to have these kind of relationships. He's defined it as a church, a poor church for the poor. See the way in which he opened up his papacy. You must have been following it on the television, even when being narrated. It is so uplifting. On the day of his election, he comes to the balcony and everybody is waiting for his blessing, and he does something very, very different. He asks the people to ask the Lord to bless him, pray for him, even before he gave the blessing. Why is he doing it? He's bonding with those with whom he would have had a tendency to lord over. He doesn't wish to do that. And only then he blesses them. That is why he says, I don't see the poor people as someone we have to help. but rather as people from whom we can learn. See how he's trying to break these boundaries that we have built in order to make the relationships in the church seamless. There should be nothing that breaks our relationships. He says, I believe that the poor are closer to God than the rest of us because they have a very personal experience of Him. So all of us who want to build bridges between us are a little better off, and the poor, watch out. He says they are closer to God. Now where do you wish to be? Very serious reflections that the Holy Father is giving us. He has given us something also as priests and theologians to think about. He says everybody is graced by the Holy Spirit to have an idea of the faith. Sensus fidei, he says, among the everyday lives of ordinary men and women, which help them grasp the reality of faith with more clarity than there are many specialists, theologians and priests. I have been applying it to myself also very often, because I think that because I preach all the while, I can always tell you what you have to do. Very often in my own preaching I try to say, maybe you should try something. I'm not very sure that I know every dimension of your life so that I can guide you. There should be more dialogue between us priests and you. This is exactly what the Holy Father is saying. The theology comes from below. You can imagine how he has learnt it the hard way with all the difficulties that he had as the provincial of the Jesuits 25 years earlier. And now this is what he's talking about. Even popular devotions, he says, some of the priests and theologians are saying that these popular devotions are useless. He says, no. Popular devotions are a great help. They help people to discover their intimacy with God, and it should be allowed. So in other words, the Holy Father is breaking all these barriers and boundaries that we have made so that we can also live in our church in seamless relationships. I'd like to ask you, my dear brothers and sisters, have we built boundaries and walls, particularly the rich and the poor? I remember one day I was arguing with a man who was very rich, as they say, filthy rich. I don't like the word, that's how it is used. And he had a brother who was very poor. Poor not because he was a waster or anything, but just that he didn't have as many talents. So one day I asked this man, I said, why don't you help your brother? He's struggling, his family is struggling. He tells me, Father, but he has never asked me. What has that got to do? Can't you see that your own sibling is struggling? How can you be happy when your sibling is struggling? No, that is between two real siblings. Jesus wants these seamless relationships among all of us. Our country, they say, is quotient of poverty is very bad. We have such a huge church in our country. Why is it that we as politicians, as religious leaders, as communities can't build better bonds? I think the small Christian communities in the Archdiocese are a great strategy. And the reasons why we are not able to meet for regular meetings is because we have built boundaries. I do not wish to talk to my neighbor. I do not wish to talk to someone who is living in the slum. How can they come to my house? They will dirty the place. Yeah. Let us pay attention to building up small Christian communities deeply bonded so that our church as a whole can become a seamless family of Christ.